Welcome to the Magalia Rose Studio online watercolor classroom. I have a question for you. Have you ever thought of using a spray bottle as an expressive tool in your watercolor studio? Well, I think we may have some ideas here that you might be interested in trying. Let's begin by looking at 3 paintings in which the random spray from a spray bottle created expressive texture when watercolor was applied to the droplets while they're still wet. This painting is titled First Autumn Snow. Here is a painting entitled Cauliflower Ruckus, in which the texture of the head of the cauliflower is done again with a spray bottle and light color. Finally, I want to share with you this lilac still life in which the lilacs themselves have been done with a spray bottle and then dropping in a variety of different purple tones and blue tones. So now you've seen some of the interesting ways you can use this technique, and now let's move on and talk about the spray bottles you need to get. Before you grab your spray bottle and get started, there's an important consideration to take into account. Not all spray bottles will create the same pattern of droplets. In my classes, I recommend having 2 types of spray bottles. One would be a very fine mist spray bottle, which these 2 on the side here are very fine mist, which is handy for wetting a painting in an area that you don't want to have drops formed. The other type of spray bottle is a coarse spray bottle, and these can often be found by recycling window cleaners and household cleaners. Rinse them out well, add clear water, and sometimes they produce some of the best coarse spray. All the previous paintings you've been seeing that I've shown you, they are a coarse spray, and that is what is necessary. There is a lot of information in this lesson, but the main objectives that I would like to achieve are: number 1, using a spray bottle and clean water to create a random foliage effect; 2, learn about masking fluid, and sometimes called frisket; and 3, creating drama with dark negative painting. Here are the supplies that I will be using. The first thing was a mechanical pencil, but any number 2 pencil will work just fine. Here are 2 samples of masking fluid. One is the Grumbacher Misket, the other is the Winsor Newton. The Grumbacher has a slightly orange tinge, and the Winsor Newton has a sort of cream yellow tinge. And then when the masking fluid is completely dry on your painting, this is very handy to have. It's a Grafix, Grafix rubber cement pickup. It easily removes the masking fluid without damaging your paper. This is 1/2-inch artist's tape that I use to attach my paper to my support board. You will need 2 containers of clean, clear water. I prefer larger containers that are clear so that I can see how dirty my water is in case I need to change that. This is a coarse spray bottle, one of my very favorites. The brushes I use are either a number 6 or a number 10 round. For the branches at the end of the painting, you will need either a very small round, this is a number 1, or a 1 or 2 sized rigger brush. And then finally, we're going to have, this is a 1/4 sheet of watercolor paper. This is Arches 140-pound cold press. This is a 1/4 sheet which measures approximately 11 by 15, but if you have a pad paper or whatever, 11 by 14 will work just fine. And this is my trusty support board that I obviously have used quite a bit. So those are my basic supplies, and let's look at what colors I'm going to be using. The watercolors that I usually use for the spray bottle trees are quinacridone gold, quinacridone burnt orange, Blick sap green, Daniel Smith indigo, Daniel Smith Payne's gray, Blick burnt under, the famous M. Graham alizarin crimson, which is one of my favorites. I don't buy brands necessarily for the brand name, but for each individual brand seems to have a little different take on a color, so I find the ones that I'm happiest with, and you'll learn this through experimentation. After the painting is done, if you want to add some other details, if you want a warm look, you can use some spatter technique with the Winsor Newton Gold Gouache, Or I sometimes like the snow effect, which is a titanium white gouache. This is the M Graham. So use the colors you have on your palette for experimentation and until you find what really works for you. Let's begin by taping our paper down to the support board. The most important thing to remember in this process is that you seal the edges very well. You don't want water creeping under that. And you can use your nail or your finger or any kind of little thing to make sure that seal is complete. Now you're going to be using the number 2 pencil to draw in the tree trunks. An odd number of elements is often recommended, but it's more important to balance the painting overall, so just do what feels right. The trunk should be on the thin side, no branches, and they should touch both the upper and the lower edge of the paper. And the lines can be reasonably dark because most of them will be obscured when we do the background and even with the masking fluid and foliage. So let's get those drawn on your paper. If the use of masking fluid or frisket is new to you, here are a couple of thoughts before you should apply the fluid. Use lightly colored fluid. I don't recommend clear or white fluids. They are difficult to see when applied, which may cause problems seeing where you have already applied the fluid. Number 2, don't shake the bottle of fluid. You can turn the bottle up and down gently a few times or take a brush handle and stir. The reason for this is if you shake, bubbles may form in the fluid. You'll brush it on and it'll leave little bubbles, which when they pop will leave a light dot of paper showing, which will take on watercolor. 3, you can use a toothpick or similar tool or a brush to apply the masking fluid. If you do use a brush to apply fluid, first thoroughly wet the brush, then cover it completely with soap. Work the soap into all the fibers, and immediately after use, by applying the masking fluid, rinse the brush. My advice is not to use a favorite brush since once dry, the masking fluid is impossible to remove. Use a pickup tool or eraser to remove the dry masking fluid. I don't recommend using your fingers. 6, if you accidentally spill the fluid on a hard surface, don't panic. Let it dry and remove it. However, I have not had good luck removing it from rugs, fabrics, or textiles. So now let's get on and talk about how we're going to apply and where we're going to apply fluid in this painting. I will be using a number 8 round brush to apply the masking fluid to the tree trunks. And before using it for that purpose, I will put soap through the entire bristles of the brush. Now, as I apply the masking, I'm going to leave random areas uncovered by fluid. That way, when the spray and then watercolor is applied, these areas will look like leaves in front of the tree trunks. Here's a diagram to give you an idea of where to leave the paper uncovered by the masking fluid. If you look, you'll see some striped areas, and those areas will be where I do apply masking fluid. The areas that are plain will simply be open to the water and spray, and watercolor to be foliage. Here's a hint: don't mask up above to the top there, because we don't want the trunk to show there. We want that to be foliage. And to reminder, draw your tree trunks from the top to the bottom of your paper, and be sure to vary the angles and distances between your trees. So right now I'm going to start masking those trunks. Now I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate applying the masking fluid by doing this one trunk on the far left. The first thing I do is I take a commercial brush cleaner soap, I add a little bit of water, and I just really scrub my brush around in there till there's just soap all over it. I sometimes will go ahead and just sort of shape it. And now it's ready to have masking applied. Here's my Grumbacher biscuit, and as you can see, it is kind of unsettled. The coloring that's usually in it has come and been settled on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and stir this with the handle of a brush. And you can see it's a very pinky color there. going to go ahead and wipe this off with a paper towel over here. And all I have to do now is apply the masking fluid. I'm just going to brush it on as if it were paint, remembering that the areas that I don't put on masking will be foliage. So there's not going to be any straight lines across. I'm going to kind of have it here, there, and everywhere. This little drop, leave it. Don't try to wipe it up now. Wait till it dries and you can take it off. And again, I want more foliage showing actually than tree trunk. So that's tree trunk, but I want a lot of foliage in there. And a lot of foliage in this top area. So that is all the masking I'm going to apply to that trunk. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to you in a few moments after I've completed all those other trunks. I'm going to go ahead and activate the colors I'm going to be using for most of the foliage. And I'm going to put a few drops of water on my quinacridone gold, quinacridone burnt orange, Blick sap green, and a bit on my alizarin crimson. I'm going to move my palette over here a bit. And here we have our masking fluid is dry. How do you know when it's dry? I've had students ask that question. You can simply lightly tap it. It'll usually still stay glossy, but if it is wet, it'll come off on your hand. If it doesn't come off on your hand at the thickest areas that you see, you can assume that it is dry. I have my brushes ready, and I'm going to go ahead and wet my brush. Usually, you always wet your brush before you put it into the watercolor. I'm just making sure I have some light puddles here of all the colors. I'm not sure which ones I'm going to use first, to be honest. I usually am very sparing with both the sap green and alizarin crimson. They're bright, brilliant colors, and I want a fall look. Bright, but not too bright. Now here's my favorite spray bottle, and I usually like to spray a section at a time. I don't like to do the whole thing because you want to get movement with the paint, and that's only going to happen if you have nice wet areas. So I'm going to go ahead and spray bottle. Take my brush. I'm going to begin with quinacridone gold, and you can see in light where a lot of the water has landed. And you're just going to start putting your brush into all those little droplets. You can drag them around. It's okay. I tend to use the lighter colors the most. And if you want more action, guess what? A little more spray. Be sure to get foliage into the areas of the trunk that don't have any masking on them. So I'm just going to quickly brush through in there. I'm going to bring a little more gold down into here. Now how about some burnt orange? Quinacridone burnt orange is a really fun color. It's rich, reddish. And let the water and the paint do the work. You're just sort of a intermediary to this process, but it's so fun. You can see my foliage is taking shape. And you're not going to fill up everything. That's not our objective here. Make sure that I again cover the foliage areas in the trunk in particular, and just drop in some little dots of color. If it's still wet enough over here, we can get some nice action. We definitely want some foliage at the top there. We don't want some bare trunk sticking out. Remember, the trees are joined, so don't be real particular about this is this tree's area. They're close together in this little forest we're creating. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and, when trees are turning in the fall, they sometimes have a little residual of green in some of the leaves. This adds a little bit of color, and when the green mixes with that quinacridone and burnt orange, it'll make a neutral, a dark brownish green, which is the color of the leaves when they turn. We're sort of having a little bit of fun with that. Okay, lastly I'm going to rinse off my brush, and I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson here and there. Again, don't brush hard. Use the tip of your brush. Just let it come in there again. It's going to do the work. I'm liking this area right here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the other trees and come back and we'll see what we've got. The foliage has been completely painted, and you can see that I'm leaving the masking on at this point. We haven't yet started the negative painting, but I wanted to show you a little important part of this process by kind of moving in a little bit closer to the painting here. Now you'll see all of these little white areas that are scattered throughout. Those are really fun and important. If you don't have a lot of them, such as in this area, you're going to kind of ad-lib adding the negative painting to intensify the autumn look. But right now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start painting the negative painting. I'm going to be using indigo. Use any dark color you have, and that is indigo, Payne's gray, whatever works. I have activated my indigo, and I'm going to go ahead and begin the negative painting process. As I said, you can use those white areas as sort of a guide, and be sure you wiggle the brush. You're trying to make things look like they're meeting little areas of foliage as you're going through. It's okay if you go clear to the top, there's no problem with that. And again, you're just going to kind of let those little white areas be your guide. You don't want them white. You want them to be the beautiful dark sky, perhaps a storm or an autumn evening coming through. And you can see as I'm with, this is a number 6 brush, 6, 8, whatever gets the paint where you want it to be. Now we're not going to worry a whole lot about the pattern that we're creating right now. We're going to be able to reevaluate and add dark areas, but remember, you can add the dark areas, but you're not going to be able to add the bright autumn foliage areas. So better to start slowly, because you can add that dark at any time you want to intensify the effect of a dark area, deep forest, sky, whatever behind. I'm going to go ahead now and let this be speeded up a bit. As you can see, I finished this one area that I had the speeded up version of, and I went ahead and moved on through the painting to this point over here. And the reason I stopped is I want to remind you, do not put any of the dark color into the tree trunk areas. And I also want you to know that if you get a large area that is not very well defined with white, now let me get a little closer so that you can see what I'm talking about here. Areas such as this, and even over here on my painting, these areas in here and here, there's not much white. So what I often do is follow the pattern of paint that has been dropped in there. This is something that you just kind of have to relax and go with, and I strongly suggest you get into a meditative state. Relax, let the paint, the water, the brush, and your drawing lead you on. Don't force things. Just sort of get into this relaxed mode and get those darks in there, and you'll start seeing the amazing effects creating foliage. I'm going to go ahead now and continue on to that far right area. I've covered the entire painting where I've wanted the negative painting of the dark indigo, and I've completed all of the areas that I wanted that way, but some of them are sort of thin. No matter how dark the paint is, sometimes on your first go around there it leaves light areas, and this is an example right here that you can see. These areas in here need another coat, as well as some areas up near the top in here. These need another coat. So I'm going to put another layer of the same indigo over all those areas, and this will give me a chance to check out a few spots where I have missed the white and it sort of has dotted through, and I can clean those up. So I'm going to do that second glaze over all the indigo, and then I will come back and we'll see how it looks then. I have painted on 2 layers of the indigo, and I'm now pretty satisfied with the background, that it's dark, it's deep, and it has a really good velvety feel to it. Just as a little vocabulary note, when you put layers of watercolor over each other, whether it's the same color or another color, that's called glazing, and you will hear that term periodically. So I have my graphics pickup tool here. It's just sort of like a hard eraser, and all you do is simply rub it over the completely dry masking fluid, and it comes right up. Please be sure that the paint is 100% dry. Otherwise, this will simply smear the paint if it hits a wet spot. And you can see it comes pretty much right up. I'll do another trunk here. Now, you will see there's some rough edges. That's okay. We're not done yet. We're going to be coming back and doing any fine tuning to what's there before we go on to the next step, which will be adding some color and texture to the trunks. And then we're going to be putting in some branches to give a feeling of these trees having branches poking out into that foliage. So I'm going to go ahead and finish removing all the masking fluid. Now I've removed all of the masking fluid with the pickup tool, and you can see how very white that's left the trunks, and we'll deal with that next. But to make sure you've removed all the masking fluid, I usually don't like to touch my paintings with my hands too much unless they're really super clean, no oils. So I'm just going to lightly run my hand over, and you'll feel if there is any masking fluid left. Now, there are a couple of spots on the trunks and even in the foliage that I'm going to need to touch up, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a close-up here so you can see what we're talking about. And these little lumpy areas need to be cleaned up, and I will just simply use indigo. If you see any areas in your foliage, for example, here's a little spot where apparently some masking fluid must have gotten in there, and I'm just going to fix that a little bit. So I'm going to fix again, do a little bit of that touch-up work, and then I'll be back and we'll discuss how we're going to paint the trunks. Now, for my taste, the white trunks are just a little too in your face and brazen, so I'm going to tone things down a little bit and add a little texture. And for that, I'm going to use the Payne's Gray. Now, be sure to have a piece of test watercolor paper that is the same type of watercolor your painting is on to test the dilution, because I want a very faint color of Payne's gray. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that's a little dark. And that's about right. And I'm just going to kind of just dab it in, being a little careful here to not get too dark, and sort of periodically get it right to the edge, but no, don't activate the indigo. So you don't want it to really get into there. And you can kind of, a little darker perhaps where there's foliage, again without totally getting it activated. And just dots here and there to add a little bit of interest. And if you want to go ahead and try dry brush, I'm going to do a little dry brush at the base of this trunk just to show you one of the ways I obtain that effect. This is just a simple round brush. I'm going to fill it with a bit of the Payne's gray, and I'm going to take a paper towel. You can use a cloth towel, and I'm not going to go to the tip, but I'm going to take the base and I'm going to pull the water into that, and then over here on my test piece of paper I can get a little bit of dry brush, and let me go ahead and put that on there. I'm going to curve it a little bit so the trunk looks like it's going to be rounded, and I'm going to come back when this is dry and do the same effect. And here I can just kind of put in some of the let me get you a little bit of a close-up of that dry brush area that we're looking at here. So you can see it's sort of a texture. So I'm going to continue, and I'm going to do the rest of the trunks, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about doing branches. Most of the trees, other than this one right here, have at least the first part of their dry brush and texturing on. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of dry brush here. And see how we can get this final tree going. Now you notice with dry brush, don't do it straight across. Curve. Remember, this is a tree, it has some curve to it. Also, you use the side of the brush. You don't use the point. And I kind of wiggle, squiggle here and there. And then I'll come in and I kind of bind the sides to the background. I'm going to grab a little more paint. It's about a little dark. Let's get a little lighter. I'm going to again squeeze just the base of it out so the brush is somewhat dry, and then come in and pull it from the edges in, both right and left sides, even this little guy. You can see if you dry brush, it goes quite a ways. You don't have to be constantly filling your brush. As I get to the top, and again I bind everything to the edge. If you want to have some extra fun, or you see an area here that's a little too dark or too light, I should say, just dip it in again. It's pretty forgiving, and remember, this is just an impression. You know, this isn't going to fool anybody that this is any type of forest tree. I don't even know what type of forest tree it is. But I'm going to go ahead and just add some here and there. And then it's also fun to come in and get a tip of your brush this time. Just get the tip of it some dark, and just add some little spots. Some little, I don't know, something where maybe a bird, a scratch, a branch fell. We're not sure, but it adds a little bit of fun. And then we pretty much have all of our tree trunks done. Let's come let them sit. We can always do a little touching up later. And but we're going to come back and we're going to do the branches. All the detailing on the trunks is dry now, and I'm going to go ahead and I have activated the burnt umber, which is going to be used to make the branches. And again, have a test strip of paper so that you can make sure that it is wet enough so that it'll flow, yet dry enough that you have a distinct image of a branch. This can sometimes be quite a game that you play with your watercolor, and it's part of what makes it interesting, and one of the reasons sometimes it's good just to take a little bit of time. Now some branches are going to be coming off the actual trunk. That's, you know, no problem at all. For example, I'm going to have this particular branch come, let me think, oh, it's going to come from over here, and it's going to simply come up, go into the foliage, and branch out. You can make it a little wider at the base and have it move up. And sometimes they disappear and they'll come back up in another place. This one's going to drip down and it's going to come back out there. It just takes a light touch, and just use your imagination. You can put your branches anywhere. They can actually even come out of the actual foliage area without being connected to the trunk. They don't have to be connected to the trunk. They can just gently come out and drop down, disappear, and come back. Don't overthink the fact that they have to connect to everything. The branches come in, branches come out. This is a small round. This is a, I believe it's a number 4 round, and a rigger is fine. I like a little more control, I admit it, control freak coming out there, but no problem at all. You can go ahead with any way you want to go. And don't be afraid to move your board around. If you feel that to get the right angle you have to turn the board, do it. If you think that you need to come over here, I'm going to widen it a little bit at the base. It's going to just disappear and come back out over here maybe. No one knows. You're the artist. You figured that out. So I'm going to continue and do some more branches, and then I'll come on back and we'll talk about what we need to do next. Well, I've got all my branches in. I went a little crazy with some of the branches, but it is sort of fun to do that. But now it's time to go ahead and do the final step. As I said earlier, you could have a warm autumn scene by using some gold gouache. And again, I'm going to go for a snowfall scene. This is going to be an autumn scene. I think I've done a couple paintings. With the last one I entitled First Snow of Autumn, and it gives a nice calm feeling of that change in the seasons. I use the M. Graham Titanium White Artist Gouache. I usually put a little dab of it into a lid or a cup or whatever you have available. And I use an old hog hair bristle brush, and this one I've actually cut. It had been just a flat, and I just cut it even shorter, give it a little more spring. I'll always have the brush wet before you use it, and then kind of just dry it off so it's damp. Now you may want to add a little water to the gouache. It depends on the consistency of the gouache that you're using. So I usually have a little darker piece of paper around to test the spray and see if I can get the pattern that I'm looking for. Doesn't really want to do much spraying for me today, does it? Maybe a little water. Oh, the water did it. You see? Experimentation. So I'm just going to spatter my snow. I'm the snowfall. That's all that I am right now. Adding some seasonal. This is a great and smaller scale card for the holidays, Thanksgiving, even into the early winter. Do not be upset if the sizes are different. We want that. We don't want a too fine a spray, we want it to be a variety of our snowflakes. Some people like to use a toothbrush to spatter. That's fine. Whatever works with you, experiment until you get a couple of favorite ones that'll produce the patterns that you like the most. Just look for any totally bare spots. Again, it's random. Okay, I think we're done with our spatter. I'll go clean off my brush and we'll meet you back when this is dry. When you're evaluating your final painting, I always recommend that students use a working mat. This is an old mat that you simply have cut into L shapes, and this helps you focus in on the painting without the distraction of a background of either a desk, a table, or whatever. It allows you to really look at your painting, evaluate it. Do this for a while before you decide whether it's what you want, what you don't want. Sometimes it takes days. I usually give a painting 3 days, putting it in different locations, different lighting, until I decide what might need correcting, or hey, it's done. And which is, you'll often hear, one of the hardest things to do in painting is to know when it's over, when it's done, when you should just leave it alone. So I hope you've really enjoyed experimenting using a spray bottle to achieve the random illusion of foliage, and maybe seeing some other potential uses for it in your painting. If you have questions, you can always contact me through my website, magaliarose.com, and the contact page will enable you to contact me with any questions. Thank you for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Magalia Rose Studio. Bye now and keep painting.